For years, Christians have been told that changing culture means fighting culture. We hear the language and metaphors of battles and enemies, victories and defeat. But what if there is a better way? And spoilers, there is a better way that is much more centered on what Jesus wants of us. That is a way of transformation where it's not about winning a war, but cultivating beauty, goodness, and human flourishing. In this episode, we're talking about culture care, and it's my privilege to do so with internationally acclaimed artist, author, and cultural thinker, Mako Fujimura. Mako Fujimura is an internationally renowned creative whose work bridges faith, culture, and the arts. He has exhibited work around the world and has become one of the leading Christian voices on the role of beauty in this fractured age. He's the founder of the International Arts Movement. He's the creator of the I Am Culture Care movement. He's a recipient of the Kuiper Prize for Excellence in Reformed Theology and Public Life, and is the author of several influential books, including Silence and Beauty, Art and Faith, and Culture Care, now being updated in its second edition. And that's going to be the focus of today's episode. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast for Christians who love Jesus but are tired of culture war faith. Now, let's get to rebuilding a faith that actually looks like Jesus. Well, it is great to have you, Mako. I appreciate you greatly as a thinker, as an artist, as a public theologian, and so it's a huge honor to have you on Christianity Without Compromise.
Well, thank you, Jake. It's great to be on.
Like I said, been a fan for a while. I think Art and Faith was my first book, but we'll talk a lot today about culture care in that book and some of that work.
Yeah.
But you got a lot of work, and big fan of pretty much everything I've come across. So I'm excited for this conversation. So we like to start off with stories on the show. You got plenty of those, but I really want to talk about kind of this time, like becoming an artist, apprenticing in these traditional Japanese art. And what did that experience teach you about cultivating beauty, about engaging with culture? That's where I want to start today. How does the art connect to some of the topics we're going to get into a little bit deeper in a little bit?
Yeah, indeed. I have many stories about that. I was born in U.S. and then spent my grade school years in Japan, came back from middle school and high school in New Jersey, went to school called Bucknell University here in the U.S. and studied art among many things. So, but I was pretty sure that I needed to try to be an artist. But whenever I painted, my professors would notice, like, have you really studied traditional Japanese art? Because it seems to pop up, unconsciously or intuitively. And I never really thought about it. So I really had to do some digging. I went to Boston Museum, has one of the largest collections of Japanese art, from the effort to try to save these masterpieces from the war. Several scholars literally put them on the boat and brought it to Boston and free air in Washington. So when I saw those, I really felt something deeply resonate. And up to that point, I hadn't really directly thought about it. I was painting in America. My art was in contemporary art, which it still is, but I have gained a lot from the Japanese tradition of art. And they call it Nihonga, Japanese painting, which is a term that was coined in 19th century to distinguish Japanese way of painting from the Western painting, yoga. So it's kind of a arbitrary term, creating these binaries that doesn't really work, but nevertheless, it's a category that exists with salon systems. Um, people trying to honor the ecosystem of culture that Japanese have created. In Japan, nature is and culture are intertwined, and so that is probably one of the cues for how I think about culture at large, and what we often find ourselves here in America in a very polarized culture. I think this idea of culture care, which really flows out of that sense of ecosystem, can speak to give us an antidote, as it were. So what I do is in contemporary art scene, and yet I am invoking and borrowing a lot of language from 17th, 16th century Japan.
That's really cool to hear about. And I love your, like I mentioned, like being engaged with some of your work on art and faith. Like you have
Mm.
this kind of slow approach,
Mm-hmm,
which
mm-hmm.
it feels so, it's always timely because I mean, there's this thing called AI, and that's a
Yes.
whole thing
Yeah.
with efficiency, and anybody can create something in seconds. Um, but the kind of art you do takes a
Yeah.
little bit of while. It takes a while.
Yeah.
Requires some skill and things.
Yeah.
Definitely,
Yeah.
like I said, relevant to today's moment.
Yeah. And even before AI was a term, you've always felt the impact of industrial revolution, really, to see human beings as machines, and
Yeah,
and part of this factory to be efficient. And I call that in my books utilitarian pragmatism, that only cares about efficiency, and dehumanizing its workers. So I've always felt that there was something very special about slowing down, and part of my journey toward Christianity was this longing that I had to integrate my full being, and to understand reality with a capital R, rather than this machinery, right, or accidental framework of how all of this beauty in front of me can be dismissed intellectually. But I couldn't do that. And this was part of, I realized only later, that my journey into Nihonga was my journey into Christian faith.
mm,
It's so amazing to say that, because most people think, it is true that Japanese history is imbued with Shintoism, animism, and Buddhism. But I really believe that there's something very distinctively Japanese, that um, if you look at it close enough, and if you honor it with the kind of sacred awareness, you do end up with Christ. And that's what my art has always been about. So my studio is the most sacred place for me. What I get to do here is absolutely an honor and privilege, to be able to pray, to give praise to God through these materials that are beautiful, and they are minerals and gold and silk. These are materials that are highly valued and in themselves as materials. But what I'm doing is to give back that glory to God, and to be able to do that through what I have been called to do, and what my hands have been gifted to do. That's a great honor.
that's the dream, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we'll pick on some of those threads a little bit here because we're
yep.
going to talk about culture care and things like that when we started that conversation. But I feel like we always have to dwell on What's gone wrong is one way to put it, or where has culture largely, whereas Christianity, maybe faith, where have they kind of get wrong? And so something we talk
Mm.
about a lot on this
Mhm.
show is the culture wars. So just kind of
Yes.
in your words, can you kind of describe what's this culture war framework? What does that
Yeah.
mean to you? What does that
Yeah.
look like?
Culture war as a term was first talked about by sociologist James Davison Hunter in the 80s, early 80s. I believe the book came out early 90s, but he has been talking about it for a while. As a sociologist, he noticed that in American conversation, there was this polarization that was taking place, a paralysis that can happen when two ideological opposites are forced to be more extreme. And he noticed this pattern, and he said, if we go at this rate, there will not be democratic process anymore, but one side always attacking the other with demonized language and reducing the taking a human toll for the whole. And so I think we're seeing the result of culture wars has been incredibly toxic and paralyzing. And not only that, today, I would say that the camps, which Hunter started to identify, are unable to even have a relationship at all, right? So they're in very
Sure.
distinct categories that has totally ignored the humanities of the other. Um, so as a result, whatever the mediating forces might be, whether it be journalism or church or any kind of educational institutions, are seen as the enemy, right? So people will take positions and then hunker down and then demonize that medium now. Now, not just the other side, but whoever's in the middle. So that's what we're seeing. And then opportunists will come and hijack that conversation because you can create a narrative that takes advantage of your hatred, your demonization language, and say, look, it's all their fault. And here I am here to give you what you want. And in fact, when this personal entity can easily um, do a switch, bait and switch, make that side really the victim, and then pretty soon you have a very abusive system where the very people who supported that person or candidate or institution becomes solely responsible for the overall degradation of culture. And that's exactly what's happening too. Dr. Hunter really did well to identify these things. It's just that we haven't been able to
Sure.
respond with any positive way.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's definitely a picture of what we're seeing in the world in a lot of corners, here
Yeah,
in the West and other places as well.
yeah,
Culture war is predominant. So your response, already alluded to it, is this term culture care.
right.
I don't know if you invented the term. That's where
Yeah,
I first learned about it. But
yeah.
can you talk about what that means and why it's important?
Yeah, I think I did coin it, but it has been used in like nursing homes, and like
Okay.
so that it's probably not a new term, but it was basically a response to finding myself conscripted into the front lines of culture wars as an artist. They would ask me what my stance is on a certain issue, even before they look at my work. My work is the last thing
Mm,
that would be talked about. And I found that with musicians, theater artists, I mean, movie producers, and we would talk about this in New York circles or LA, and we, we say like, what's happening? Like we don't, that's not what we're about. We're trying to do something, create something beautiful or true, or, whether we have faith angle or not, we care about the medium of what, and the product that it serves the world in some way. And it gets hijacked by culture wars rhetoric. We are quick to enlist people, and then we're thrown into stage of political spectacle. And it's just so as an artist, I began to talk about this among my friends, and I said, well, we really need to talk about the ecological reality, really borrowing from what I learned in Japan. And what I do as an artist is to continue to think about the ecology of culture. So rather than the metaphor of culture as a language, as metaphor being a battleground in culture wars, why not just change the metaphor and see what happens to ecosystem, or even something to tend to, like a garden, that we are given a common patch of ground, a soil of culture that we all have to share. And wouldn't it make sense to work together to detox it? Whether you're growing a tomato, or a cucumber, or whatever your intent is, we should work together, because the next generation is going to suffer if we keep adding toxin to the ground. They will not be able to grow anything. So we need to do our work today to make culture viable, and that kind of conversation, right? And I found it first healing for artists to talk about it that way, because that is a long-term generational vision rather than a short-term, I win and you lose kind of language. And the other real problem with cultural wars is that it leads to real wars. These are not just words.
Sure.
They lead to action. And that's what we're seeing in the world too. And, you might be sick and tired of wars. We all talk about, how damaging wars are to, to civilization.
Yeah.
And
everybody.
obviously we have weapons to do a lot of damage and even more. And so it doesn't really make sense to do anything that will cause, that possibility to increase even higher. We're simple enough. We have enough problems loving our neighbors, or loving ourselves, or loving our spouses. Why create this intentional language, rhetoric of culture wars? And by the way, no one wins culture wars, because you win by demonizing the other side, which is by throwing poison at them. And by doing so, you're poisoning your own ground.
Yeah.
So every time you win, you lose. You're fighting this, shrinkage of territory that, and you're kind of standing on this little, plot, and you're asking yourself, like, why is it so small, and why am I so fearful? Why am I so filled with anxiety? I thought I won this battle for a future generation, but now it's worse, right? So this tactic of winning culture wars does not work.
Yeah, it definitely does not work. So big fan of metaphors, big fan of better metaphors, like you're saying, this culture care. I'm not a painter. I am an artist in with words. I write fiction and nonfiction. That's my thing.
Yeah.
You don't want me painting on a canvas probably. At least it won't look,
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on from that point. I'm really curious, like, what is the role of an artist in this? I know you kind of expand the definition
Yeah.
of an artist.
Right.
Why do they play an important part in culture care?
Cultural care depends so much on artists. I liken it to honeybees, and
Yeah. Okay.
part of the beauty of this metaphor is that
Uh huh.
people think you sting. So
Oh.
you walk into a church and people immediately kind of like
Mm.
are they gonna sting you? And we're just wearing up black and sitting in the back, and but as I know in my art and faith book, God is an artist, right? And Jesus sent us out in John 10 to create life of abundance through the gospel, and yet we seem to be exhibiting as a church right now this demonization has taken hold of us, and when you look at Galatians 5, the fruit of spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and faithfulness, and self-control, is replaced by the works of the flesh, which is you can read the list, and it describes exactly our culture today. So
Mm.
the church preaching the gospel has not done a good job. I don't think it has manifested in culture at large. It's not just us. The fruit is in culture at large. So if it's not fruitful, if it's not filled with love and care, then there's something wrong with how we have believed the gospel to at least manifest in the world. And I posit that artists are one of these creatures that are sent out like honeybees to why are they sent out from their hives to find beauty, right? They are looking for beauty, and by finding beauty, a flower, they God has created us to pollinate what is good, true, and beautiful into the world.
Mm.
But because of the toxins and pesticides, our population has been devastated. We can no longer do that well. So, artists need to find a place where this kind of ecosystem is available to them to nurture their gifts and to grow and to be natural pollinators in this world. And so part of the critical dimension of cultural care is to first see this field full of fruit trees, that we have worked for generations to plant and detox the soil. Of course, today we have to do that first, but also the care. Anybody who has a garden knows this. If you don't care for your garden, you're not going to be able to find beauty. Right?
Sure.
The weeds are going to take over, and and all sorts of things can happen if you're not tending to your garden. And we haven't tended to culture at large. And that is one of the great charges that God has given us to tend to this earth. We are to ask heaven to come down to earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
God's will being done on earth as well as in heaven, right? As it is in heaven. So, so that work seems to be the primary goal of a Christian. And I would even posit that every Christian is an artist in the kingdom of God, and because God is the artist, the only true artist, that can create something out of nothing, ex nihilo, and we are not even close to that capacity, and yet God has imbued us with a gift of grace and gift of creativity and imagination. And the faith is a sanctified imagination that sees the future as beautiful, right? That's what heaven is. And so no matter what your definition of beauty is, we can all agree that it is a place that we will find ourselves being nurtured, that we can grow our wings, and whatever we create will be part of the new creation. And that part is staggering to think about,
Mm.
because the reality of you writing a single word on a piece of paper with faith, me painting some, a line with faith here, means that there's a reverberation that act causes that doesn't exist before we do it, that God has initiated before eternity began, and that is continuing to reverberate into the new creation future. And God is going to somehow take our finite offerings and create something eternal with it. I mean, that is what the gospel promises, and it's a staggering promise. So instead of fighting culture wars, if we start taking care of the soil, real soil as well as cultural soil,
Yes.
We can really learn. Every single one of us can be an artist for the kingdom of God.
I love it. I do. It just, it's a compelling metaphor. It is. And you extended it very well, putting bees in there and everything. It's great.
Yeah.
Love it. But that is compelling. That is just such a better vision of reality than culture wars. Culture wars seems to be, more effective or something, because there's a competitive part to it. We like to win, sure,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But thinking of the future, I kept thinking of hope, what you were talking about, that fostering that imagination, bringing heaven down, all of that, like that
Mm-hmm.
is much more in line with this vision that Jesus gives us in the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
You got your kind of cardinal virtues, faith, hope, and love. All of that plays a part in there. So, wow. Oh yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I'm hoping to spend a little bit of time. We're not quite at the end yet, but we're starting to wrap up here.
Mm-hmm.
I want to spend some time. If you can just kind of talk to us about what culture care looks like in ordinary practices. How can we become cultivators of beauty and goodness and human flourishing? Um, some examples or some tip, whatever you want to give us. How can we do this?
Well, I first of all, I had to ask that question that you just asked. What does it look like? And kind of began to look for different things in the world. And before I perhaps because I care about orthodoxy or faith and all that, I look for certain checklists, right? Whatever the institution, churches, whatever that may be. But then at one point I thought, well, I think I was at a farmer's market, and you go to a farmer's market and there's always one store with long lines. People are lined up. You could have like maybe 3 tomato stands. One has a long line, and so you kind of ask, like, why like wait in line when you can go to this line and get tomatoes? And if you ask a person in that line, they'll tell you they have all sorts of reasons, right? Like, this tomato is amazing. And I love this person. I love this, the philosophy of this farm, right? I care about that, and I want to support it, whatever the reason may be. But it's causing abundance and fruitfulness, right? I was in LA once, and there were like 3 kimchi stands, and there's one stand that is huge. So I asked, like, people saying, like, why are you standing in this line? There are other lines. And they say, well, this is made by grandma.
Okay.
And I said, does it taste different? And they said, yes. But we don't know why. It's made by this one grandma, and that's care, right? That is truly the taste of care. That you can actually tell the difference when something is made in love, something machine produced, something, So culture care will look like that, right? But it may not be in places that you want to find them. For instance, in churches, right? I want to find them in churches. I look for churches with cultural care values and have the gospel, being preached, right? But it's actually very hard to do because the churches have become itself a kind of this cultural wars territory, right? And it's been hijacked, and it has all sorts of signals, where you have to you yourself have to check the right, list and bring the right list, I guess, and wear a mask to please the people. And I, as an artist, I can't do that. I'm too honest, and I get too tired trying to do that. so I kind of gave up, and I said, well, where are the long lines for this kimchi, made by grandma? And I've been finding it in different places. I've been finding it in farmlands where people actually do care about a land, and I was just touring this farm that is dedicated to planting chestnut trees, and and then the food that is produced there is so delicious because it has vibrancy and life. Tomatoes taste like what it's supposed to taste like. It's full of life, and but this is not a church, right? The owner is not a Christian. So, what am I supposed to do? Well, the word culture care helps, right? Because we can talk about culture care in a way that makes sense to this person, even though we may not share our faith. And I can actually learn so much from this person. Yeah. And I do have a farmland, a little bit of a land here. So I want to start planting chestnut trees, because it takes 10 years for chestnuts to grow, it's slow art,
Slow art is right at the alley. Yeah.
But that rejuvenates the soil, and chestnuts have all these amazing detoxing capabilities as well. And so I started to look for things that will certainly you feel love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all these things that we need to harness, right? And of course there are churches. I just came back from a national cathedral in this huge gathering called Understory, the Comment magazine in Canada put together, and it was this really beautiful kind of messy mixture of people, but it wasn't driven by ideology. Like a lot of conferences you go to, again, there's a checklist, right? And I don't do well in those because I immediately, I can't obviously align myself sometimes with thousands of other people, and each person has a different thing that they're trying to promote, and I get so tired as an introvert. But this gathering was very special to me because there were people talking about books and poetry and what it means to be human. In an age of when we all feel this kind of encroaching, power of artificial intelligence or whatever, and there are people talking about AI as a hopeful thing. There are people, and we get to sit down and have drinking coffee with people that has genuine interest in creating a future that is culture care. And so these do exist in the church, and I'm grateful for them. But all of us would do well, I think, to understand what the other brings, even these territories that we are fighting against. Sometimes you find pockets of grace operating in the enemy territory, right? And as artists, we propensity is to look for those things and find stories in them. But Jesus told us to go out in twos and threes, right? So we shouldn't try to do this alone. We need a community. And so I Am Culture Care, which is a nonprofit I founded almost 35 years ago, is one of the efforts to bring those mycelium network of understory, underground network together. So you will find these fruitfulness in various places.
Yeah, and you're right. We just gotta open our eyes and look for them. They might come in surprising places.
Yes.
I also like what you said. Like I grew up half thinking like I had to do like big things, like I had to change the world or whatever.
Right.
I think I've said before on this podcast, like in high school, I was voted most likely to win a Nobel Prize. Probably not happening. Like I felt like I had to do big, crazy things. Who knows? But but like we don't have to always do that. We have little spheres. We can make that great tomato, that great kimchi.
Yes, absolutely.
We have little. There are little ways to be faithful to show that fruit of the Spirit. So that's one of the things that jumped out on what you were saying. All good stuff. Very good reminders. Well, I do want to take some time now to talk about kind of where you're found these days.
Yes.
We talk. So Culture Care has a second edition coming out right around the time that this episode releases.
That's awesome.
You got some other books and writings. What do you want to send people?
Yeah, so I have written 5 books, and they all kind of relate to each other. It is like an ecosystem, so you can start with one, and you probably find threads. But Culture Care was a kind of a small essay that I wrote as part of I Am Culture Care movement, just to encourage artists. It started out and to give language to what I call creative catalysts. They may not be artists, but they are business folks or teachers that care about culture, and so that 15, 20 years later, this has become larger than itself. There's literally movements all around the world, pockets of people who have created nonprofits, who have sent us stories of how 2 or 3 artists gathered in Bangladesh have started to shape something that is real and lasting and generational in these places. And so I updated what I wrote, and David Brooks agreed to write a foreword for it, which is amazing. And then Mark Laverton, who used to be the Fuller president, I asked him to write a afterword for pastors, a letter to pastors, why culture care is absolutely fundamental for the gospel, understanding the gospel and manifestation of what Jesus has called us to do. So I think it would be very practical, book, even though the way I write is just like bees meandering, that kind of doesn't land, except, I find beauty and I land and pollinate. But so that would be a great place to have a conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I own the first edition. I might just have to get the second edition. Sounds good. Add to the collection.
Thank you.
Grow the library a little bit. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, Mako, before we let you go, I always give everybody one final question. We make everything uber duper practical here at the end. So I'm going to read the question just like I read it to every single guest that's on the show. And I think we're around like 90 episodes at this point. So here's the question. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
One thing that anybody can do is to open their hearts, be aware of what is immediately around us. We are built to long for a home, to seek kingdom in that way, but we don't fully realize that God sees that in us. In other words, God's homecoming is in what we are able to see and create in the world. And by creating, I do not mean like you and I having some formal way of being an artist. Human beings are created to be creative. We see things and we respond. Our senses immediately start to create. If it's filled with anxiety and fear, that's what we will create more of. But if we are filled with love, we will create this abundant generative reality, no matter where you are, whether you're, as I had to do, live in Ground Zero, New York for 10 years, or slums of South Asia, or museums, in Italy. No matter where you are, there is this reality in front of us that only we get to be part of at that moment, uniquely, for limited time, right? It doesn't happen again. The circumstance does not happen again, ever. So when we activate awareness, which is really activating our faith, we start to see links. We start to see that, oh, this can lead to this, or I can respond to this in this way. First of all, with wonderment and love and this joy that we will be filled with if we really understood what was around us. Now, some people are going through hard things, and they may not immediately find joy in that, but awareness, slowing down and taking a deep breath and letting whatever the circumstances we are in, that does not control, right, what we create into the world, that the love that we can see even despite the bleakness and darkness. Guess what? The Bible was written by people in exile, people who were alienated from their homeland, the people who were pushed aside as insignificant, and they were persecuted. They suffered, and yet they found this way of being present in love, right? So that's what we're called to, and that's the one thing we need to do right now.
Great. Well, there we go. Awareness, beautiful. Well, that's definitely something we can focus on. And just our encouragement today, go be little busy bees.
Yes.
Pollinating the flowers, making
Right.
everything a little more beautiful, a little bit better.
Yes,
definitely can
amen.
do that. Mako, thank you for joining us today. Super appreciate you being a conversation partner to us. To all the listeners, I really want to encourage you to share this episode because we had a great conversation. Think of somebody that that maybe is an artist or wants an alternative to the culture war that seems to be in every church they visit or something like that. Share this episode with them. Get that conversation started. Check out the second edition of Culture Care, his nonprofit work, your art, all that stuff. Definitely want to encourage everybody to go there. But once again, Mako, thank you. It's been great having you on today.
What a delight. Great to be with you, Jake. Thank you for doing this. And thank you. Congratulations on the 90-some episodes. That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. Yeah, I just looked it up. This is episode 93. So we're getting almost to 100.
Almost
so.
there, something. That's amazing. That is amazing.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
This episode of Christianity Without Compromise was hosted by me, Jake Doberenz, and produced by Theophany Media, my podcast production company. If this conversation served you, please rate and review the show and share it with a friend and help others find it. You can also subscribe at jakedoberenz.substack.com to get email updates with new episodes every Tuesday and my often humorous theological reflections on Fridays. And as always, don't just listen, live it. Live out that Christianity without compromise. Thanks for listening.